This is Bonjour Chai. The real Stanley Cup was the friends we made along the way edition. I'm Avi Finegold in Montreal, and I'm here with Melissa Lantsman in Toronto and Ilana Zackon in Vancouver. We are your frozen chosen. On today's episode, we will discuss Judaism, sustainability, and climate change with Tzipora Berman, as well as corporations and free speech. How are you guys?
I'm doing okay. How are you doing, Melissa?
Doing pretty good. How are you guys?
We're, it's summer. Things are good. You're in a campaign, I'm guessing, Melissa?
I am in full campaign mode. If anyone wants to hear about it, we're expecting an election. I think everybody's expecting election this fall in Canada, and we're getting ready. As a lot of our listeners know, I'm a candidate in the next one, and we're hitting the ground running and doing all of the things like knocking on all of the doors and setting up a campaign office and just doing our thing up in Thornhill, just north of Toronto.
Yeah. What's new with you, Ilana?
Nice. Speaking of Thornhill, I'm not moving to Thornhill, let's be clear. But where I was going with that is when I was a baby was the last time I lived in Toronto, and it was in Thornhill. So I'm actually going to be moving to Toronto to live closer to my family, who's mostly in Montreal. So that's my big thing that I've been focusing on, looking for places. Not in Thornhill, sorry.
Oh,
probably downtown. But
I'm glad to say I have never lived in Toronto. I'm very happy about that. I think I can handle Toronto for up to a week at a time. But Toronto's Toronto.
So, Avi, tell us what's going on in the Montreal summer.
The Montreal summer, it's, kids are in day camp. I'm busy. I'm recording all sorts of other podcasts, which we can talk about in the future. I'm ready to launch 2 new podcasts, actually.
Wow.
I can tell you briefly, and there's a little bit of log rolling, and it's not going to, I was going to put it in my nachas, but we'll do something else. I am set to launch a new podcast called Hyphen. It's a podcast for Judeo-Christians. And it's me and an amazing Anglican theologian, and we talk about like what Jews need to know about Christianity and what Christians need to know about Judaism. Meaning, like, a lot of Christians don't know what a chassid is or orthodoxy versus reform and all this stuff. And Jews don't know about Easter or Advent or the difference between the Pope and a cardinal and a bishop and all of these things and different denominations. So we sit and we discuss and how we read the Bible differently and what are the similarities. It's a really interesting discussion. We started recording a few episodes already, and we are set to release that next week. So you can check out Hyphen on, wherever you get podcasts or on my website, jewishliving.lab.com. And then there's others coming in the future that we've been recording that I'm not ready to talk about yet. So I've been keeping busy indoors recording stuff because it's, there's not much else to do. Well, things are opening up, but
sure. Looking forward to that one.
Excellent. Before we get to our first topic, let's hear from our first sponsor.
Today's episode is brought to you by our sponsor, Atelier Lou Bijouterie in Montreal, Quebec. Atelier Lou specializes in watches and custom design jewelry along with a curated selection of designer jewelry. Visit them online or in person, and Eric Goldberg will help make your jewelry dreams come true. Atelier Lou is offering a promo code for all Bonjour Chai listeners using BON18 at checkout for 10% off your order at atelierlou.com.
So I don't know if you heard this story this past weekend, that there was a Starbucks in Hamilton, Ontario. Somebody walked in over the weekend and saw a Palestinian flag and a message of solidarity posted on that little like blackboard that they have there with the drinks and where your coffee is coming from today or whatever. Immediately took a picture of it, put it up on Facebook, started calling for a boycott. Starbucks Canada was reached. They didn't want to make a comment, but then they told the store to take it down. And that's that. What do we make of this? Is this really a story at all?
Well, I'm gonna jump in as the resident Tory on the panel, and look, this isn't a story in more than this is a story for Starbucks. This is a story for corporate values, for corporate culture, for corporate rules about what you want on display in your stores. And as a consumer that is particularly pro free speech, and if you're not hurting anyone, I've got my own what I can do about it, and as I can decide as a consumer whether I want to now spend my money there. So that's a problem for Starbucks. It's certainly not a problem for me. But I think this discussion, frankly, is more about what corporations do in terms of values and political stances, and if that's appropriate in a location like that when you're trying to serve customers coffee or snacks.
Right. I think it becomes a bigger issue for me when, not this incident in particular, but when you look at the broader picture of companies that have been outwardly homophobic or anti-Semitic, or ones where the actual CEOs of the company have made public statements expressing their opinions, because then it becomes more of like a human ethical issue as opposed to something like this of someone just supporting Palestinian rights, which isn't making any claim against Jews, or there was no hate implied in this picture that was posted, right?
No, I mean, it was just like I said, it was a Palestinian flag, which is illegal.
Yeah.
Like, it's there, it's a flag, and a message of solidarity for the Palestinian people. Like, I thought about it right away, and I was like, well, I can assure you that if it had been an Israeli flag and saying we support, Israel strong, everybody would be like, look how awesome Starbucks is. They support Israel, and this is amazing, right? And the day that somebody would have walked in and said, well, you're not really supporting Palestinian rights, you should take it down, and complain to Starbucks, we would have gone and said, what? They're allowed to say whatever they want. That's perfectly fine. We support Israel. They support Israel, and that's amazing. And so I'm with both of you in the sense that, yes, I think Starbucks should have taken it down because maybe they want to have zero political opinions about anything,
Right.
And the flip side of that is, we shouldn't be complaining about it because people have the right to, promote what they want in solidarity and loving X and not saying we hate Y.
Sure. People have the right to promote that insofar as their individual right to promote it, whether it's on your Facebook or on your Instagram or your own feeds. I don't necessarily think that right exists when you work within a corporation. I think that's up to the corporation. Yeah. And don't forget that this is a politically charged conversation. So whether you think it's it's just supporting Palestine or it's just supporting Israel, there is a big conversation that is currently happening with a very polarized public on the difference between, in my view, right and wrong. So I don't think it's as innocent as just supporting a certain side. It comes with a basket of goods, a politically charged conversation, and I think that this is a story more about Starbucks and how to get a handle on individual opinions of their employees that don't belong in a corporate workplace.
Yeah, I agree that it's but what if a corporation does come and make a stand against
Right.
something or for something, right? Could you imagine if Starbucks went out and said, we are for fracking. We believe in, the oil sands as the future of Canadian economy, and we support this, right? Would we, would there be a backlash against Starbucks in the East, but then in Alberta, they'd be like, yay, Starbucks, this is amazing.
Probably. That sounds pretty accurate.
Yeah, it sounds pretty accurate, but it would be, first of all, Starbucks is not stupid enough to do something like that because it's a contentious issue. And so that's why Starbucks
Right.
asked them to take it down, not because they believe in, Israeli rights over Palestinian rights, or they don't believe in whatever it is. They're like, this is complicated. And Starbucks tends to only support social justice causes that are incredibly safe,
Right.
like Pride Month in June in the year 2021, where 20 years ago, they would have never done something like that.
Right. I'm curious, do you personally, Melissa and Avi, when you hear stories of corporations who do outwardly declare a stance, whether it's political or social or any kind of merging of the two, are you one of those people who are like, oh, now that I know this, I'm never going to shop at Urban Outfitters or insert company of choice.
Yeah, that's the power I have as a consumer. I can make my decisions if a corporation makes their decisions about what they support politically, and I think that there's sometimes a value in corporations siding with a certain set of values, but oftentimes this is about the bottom line. This is about serving coffee to the largest number of people, and maybe not taking a position, maybe taking a position on better coffee.
Yeah, I have a hard time with it. I think it's a case-by-case basis, and I think that because corporations are so vast and so impersonal that I can't imagine that a corporation is taking a stance, because even within that corporation, there is so much going on, right? Suppose somebody is pro-union and they decide to say, we're going to stop buying from Amazon, right? Are they sitting and looking every time they shop to make sure that everything is pro-union, right? Some people do, and some people say, okay, I'm against this, but like at the end of the day, the people that I'm shopping from are, I'm buying from, I'm paying Jeff Bezos, but I'm paying so many other people in between, and there's so much there, right? To me, the interesting analog is, do we stop listening to some musicians' music, for example, when they are pro-Palestinian, which a lot of people do and a lot of people don't. There's a lot of Jews, for example, that don't listen to Wagner, and there's a lot of Jews that say, I don't care how overtly anti-Semitic Wagner was, his music is amazing, and I'm able to separate the two things.
Right. Yeah, separating the art from the artist. That's a big conversation.
Or separating the product from the corporation.
Yeah. That's a big conversation in the arts community.
But let's not forget that if we are going to defend free speech in this country, which is a central tenet to our democracy, that we cannot pick and choose when that free speech is allowed. What you can do as an individual, as a consumer, as a listener of music, is that you can make your own choices, and that's at the end of the day, like I won't defend every single value, but I will defend your right to say what you want to say in this country. And I think there's an attack on free speech, and you don't have to look further than this news story to see it.
Yeah. Thank you, our resident Tory, for standing up for free speech rights.
I do what I can for the people.
Melissa had to step out for this segment, but she will be back with us for Nachas at the end. This summer has seen record-setting temperatures across Western Canada and the USA, with individuals dying from the heat and communities going up in flames from wildfires. And while we hope that even the most ardent climate denialists would be rethinking their positions by now, there is still much work to be done. Joining us to talk about this is Tzipora Berman, who is an author, a professor, a climate activist. She has been a leading voice across many issues, but particularly with deforestation in British Columbia, from her early days at Cliaquot Sound to the blockade at Fairy Creek this past spring. Tzipora, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
I want to start with, where do you think we are at this point in time in 2021? Just give us sort of a spotlight, a lens that we can move forward from.
Well, we're all experiencing it. I mean, whether you live in British Columbia or not, it's impossible now and on any part of the globe not to have felt some weird or extreme weather at best, and at worst, not to know family members that have had to flee from fires, from floods, from droughts, from extreme weather. We're living in a moment where more people lose their homes today as a result of climate change than war, where the greatest threat now to human health, including the pandemic we have just experienced, is in part either made worse or because of our changing climate. So we're living in this moment where literally every ton of carbon matters. And, climate change is complicated. But what's not complicated is that it comes from three products: oil, gas, and coal. They're trapped in our atmosphere, they're blanketed in the earth, and they're smothering us. And we need to change how we use those products.
Totally. I know that there was some recent announcement about electric cars being something that will be more enforced. My mom sent it to me, so I'm not sure if it was just in Quebec. I'm not going to lie, I'm not an expert when it comes to environmentalism. I try to stay up to date on what I hear. So I do have a lot of questions around that in terms of what can we do as someone, or if other people are listening who don't feel like they're experts on environmentalism but want to make a change? What are the little things that we can do in our day-to-day that help with these problems? Is it changing to electric cars? What are other things that we can do?
Well, there's no question that changing our lifestyles is important. If you have the ability to buy an electric car instead of a fossil fuel car, you should. It also makes sense because you're right, Canada is going to be banning the fossil fuel car. They say, the federal government says by 2035, many countries around the world are doing that. And so electric cars are going to get more prevalent and cheaper, and that's great. But, at this point, scientists call what we're living in right now a climate emergency. And when you're in an emergency, it's not just about whether you buy better cars or better light bulbs, it's about better laws. If we are going to make the world safe for our children, for our grandchildren, if we're going to ensure that we're not just limping from one disaster to another, this flood, that heat dome, that wildfire, then we actually need to change our laws so that we build new and different infrastructure to keep people safe. The good news is that now renewable energy is actually cheaper than fossil fuels in most parts of the world. Battery storage is way better. But so if you're thinking about one thing that you can do, I think the most important thing that people can do is pick up the phone, call their MLA or their MP, or write a letter, because we need our elected officials to know that this is the issue that matters to us, that they have our support if they act, and if they don't, that there'll be consequences.
So I guess I was going to start with something more personal, but I guess I want to go in a more global direction based on what you're just saying. One of the things that I notice, and I want your take on this, is that there are many, we're a Jewish podcast, you're Jewish, we're Jewish, I want to talk about that for a bit. There are many Jews involved as activists in this sphere and in many other spheres in Canada. And yet we don't really see much in the way of organized, combined, collective activism from within the Jewish community as a Jewish entity. I know Shorish exists in Toronto, but I can tell you that as of last week, I didn't know that existed, and I've been involved with Chazon in the U.S. and many other organizations for 15 years. Why do you think that, we can talk about the Jews as individuals, but yet we don't really see a lot of collective action when this really can and should be a fundamentally Jewish topic?
I'm really not sure. I mean, I meet a lot of Jewish leaders in the climate movement, in climate policy, in governments around the world. But I really have been surprised that I don't see more organized work on these issues, from Jewish institutions. And, I wonder if it's because for so many decades, our governments, and the fossil fuel companies themselves have tried to make it seem like this is not an issue of collective action. It's an issue of individual action. It's about what you buy. It's about whether or not you're responsible in your home. Because then the onus is kind of off them. And there's a lot of, I'm also an academic, there's a lot of academic research and studies right now showing how the fossil fuel industry has made us kind of feel guilty about this. It's our fault because we use oil, we heat our cars, we heat our homes with gas, and therefore, it's kind of our fault. We have a duplicity. So people think that the only thing they can do is change their own collective action or their own lifestyle, their own personal responsibility. And maybe that's why it hasn't moved into collective action in a lot of places. But it actually really does surprise me. I mean, as a Jew, we're taught we are all Shomrei Adamah. We are guardians of the earth. In the Midrash, it's clear that we are custodians, not owners, that our sacred responsibility is tikkun olam. And what does that mean? That not just that we have to protect, but that we have a responsibility to repair the world. And so I take that very seriously, and I think it's part of what fuels me. And the thing that I'm actually also has always been a quandary for me is that I grew up with a sense of community and collective responsibility more than a lot of my friends, and it was because of our Jewish community. I grew up going to synagogue and as a teenager, in USY. I was USY president. I was, and we volunteered. We volunteered at our synagogue with seniors. I volunteered with the kids doing services, and so I feel like we do have a culture of volunteering and participating in our communities. But I'm quite dismayed to see the lack of collective Jewish action on climate change. Actually, it needs to change, but every day is a new day.
Was that correlation always very clear to you between your Jewish identity and your activism or your environmentalism? Or is that something that you started to recognize was more linked as you got older and learned more?
It definitely was as I got older and learned more. In some ways, I think I turned away in my teens or early 20s from my practice and my community. I think it was in part because I didn't see a lot of the things that I was learning to really care about in my community, and it's as I've gotten older that I've come back to it. There was a practice growing up of, as I said, of being a part of community and engaging with my community, but not necessarily as environmentalism. And it's as I've gotten older and looked at the teachings and thought, actually, it's right here. It's all right here for us.
Yeah, I imagine there's not a lot of USY presidents that went logging, in their 20s to BC.
Wait, to be clear, I didn't go logging. I went to blockade logging.
That's what I meant. I was thinking tree planting, and then I don't know why I said logging. Yeah, yes. But yeah, it's really shocking to me because, you talk about this as the Tikkun Olam piece, and I see so many sources, and there's so many books about this. It's, to me, and I helped write a curriculum on Jews and food and sustainability with Chazon years ago, and if there's one topic that there is so much written about, I see this on Judaism and vegetarianism, but I see it on Judaism and climate change as well. That the sustainability is there. We talk about Bal Tashchit, right? It's not even the Midrash. There's a biblical source that says that when you besiege a city, we're not going to talk about the good or the bad in that. You're not allowed to cut down the fruit-bearing trees because just for the sake of punishing whoever's being besieged because you're not, or for battering rams or anything like that, because fruit-bearing trees actually provide us with something. And the analog to me, where we go and say we're cutting down trees for catalogs, like with your Victoria's Secret activism or any other really stupid things that we do, just so that we can cut down those trees, but where they're providing us not so much with fruit, but with carbon sinks and, everything else that comes along with the benefit of having so many trees, right? This is a biblical commandment to do this. I had a rabbi do a teaching once where he said that it's a biblical prohibition based on this to drive an SUV, because if you have to drive a car, you should be able to drive a smaller car and not waste as much gas. So there's so much around this, and yet and there's so many countries in America, we see so much of the stuff happening here, but there's so many countries where this isn't happening. There's so many places, especially in Canada, where we don't see this as a community moving forward. And
in the future, I think our communities are going to matter so much more, even than they do today, because when you're in a situation where it's where you're in danger, where your community is important. If you have no power, if you have no water, if you're in the middle of a heat dome, and some of your neighbors are elderly, your community matters. And it really, living through the heat dome these last couple of weeks in British Columbia really reminded me of that, really made me think. It made me go knock on some doors and check and see if people were okay. 700 people died in a 4-day period in British Columbia. And the doctors and medical professionals are saying it's in large part because of heat exhaustion, and we're seeing that all over the world. It's the most vulnerable that are first impacted by climate change, and so your community is even more important. And so we need activism in our communities in order to stop the expansion of fossil fuels, to push our governments to shift to the infrastructure that we need for renewable energy and safer, cleaner systems. But we also need to be thinking about how are we going to adapt to this changing climate, because the climate is now changing. We're in it now. This isn't theory anymore. We're living in the climate era, in a changing climate, and really the only question left in front of us is how much and how fast.
Yeah, something that blew my mind as someone who's also living in BC is just how badly our infrastructure is made for like a heat wave of that capacity, and how our houses, like my house wasn't air conditioned. We had to move to my roommate's mother's place, who also didn't have an air conditioned house, but for some reason the way her house was positioned was cooler, and we were dipping our feet in like a baby swimming pool outside with fans blowing on us. So to be honest, when I was in the thick of the heat wave, it was so intense that I wasn't even looking at the news. I was so overwhelmed by the heat that all I was thinking about was protecting the people around me. And then after it started dipping down, I was looking at the news and I was like, oh my God, people died from this? I mean, it makes sense. And then the whole thing in Lytton. So I wonder if now in BC, is that something that's coming up in conversation around protecting our elders and people at risk, about changing things like air conditioning or other ways of making sure that if another big heat wave happened again, that wouldn't occur to that degree?
I think it's starting. But we have, as humans, an amazing ability to adapt, to see situations as the new normal, and then just go on with our daily lives. There is an enormous amount written in climate psychology, talking about how people kind of adapt and turn away from it. And I've been thinking a lot about that. I've been thinking about how the most important thing we can do, or maybe the first step right now, is having the courage to face it, to understand the state of the world, the climate emergency, to be talking about it, to not let us just go back to our daily lives until the next disaster. I mean, I was horrified, of course, as everyone was, last year, to see thousands fleeing from the fires in California that just wreaked havoc, or the floods in Miami. And now what's happening? They're rebuilding apartment buildings in flood zones in Miami. People are shifting and moving slightly, but rebuilding those same towns, and we're still drilling for more oil and fracking in California. I think there's a parallel here as Jews. I grew up with my bubby telling me stories of how my family escaped the pogroms in Poland. I grew up with my neighbor down the street telling me how she got the number on her forearm in Auschwitz. Both talked about how lucky I was, how our families had struggled and fought for the freedom we have today, and we're taught as Jews never to forget. We're taught not to take our freedoms for granted, that we have to have the courage to face what's happened and make sure it can never happen again. And I think sometimes all of this feels too big. It's invisible sometimes. It's scary. We're too small. I'm just one person, and we turn away. And I think that, just like millions around the world turned away during World War II. And I think we have to have the courage to face what's happening. Never forget. Le'olam tanishkach. And we can't afford climate silence. We can't afford to turn away. And that has to be our practice right now. We have to say to people, look, it's not just about adapting to wildfires, getting more firefighters. It's about how are we going to stop this from getting worse, and how are we going to protect our communities?
It's interesting, the analogy you bring up, and it has me thinking now, that as a community, we're focused, and we've spoken on our program often about anti-Semitism in the community and the way the community feels about it. It's hard to point a finger, right, at the climate and say, oh, the climate hates the Jews, right? Because it's this thing, it's this entity. And so it almost feels like we don't have a response to it in the same sort of way to go and say, well, we have to go and fix this, because it's just this amorphous thing. And as you say, we're such a small segment of the population that it doesn't really matter. And I'm always struck, right, in that vein, by the tension between the individual and the, and the larger picture, where I'm of the belief, and maybe you can tell me that I'm wrong, that even if everybody was a perfect citizen, drove an electric car, composted, put out very little garbage, did everything the way that they were supposed to, made sure that their energy usage was very, very, very moderate, and everything was perfect, we still wouldn't make a real dent in it. And yet if the top 10, corporations that were polluters and, fossil fuel users were to significantly reduce, then everything would shift around. And that it's really about larger corporations. And I see that in the work that you do with targeting larger corporations and not necessarily as much the individuals. How do we deal with that at the, we're a community, but we're a small community in relation to the rest of the country, but yeah, we're a leading voice in certain places. Do you see where that tension lies? And I wonder if you can address that.
Well, as a community, we and Jewish institutions advocate for better laws and policies. We do. We advocate for laws and policies that affect Israel. We advocate for laws and policies that affect our daily lives all the time.
Yeah, but that's my point, right? Is that we look at things that are self-interesting, and as a community, we don't necessarily think about the climate as something which is self-interesting specifically to the Jewish community.
And we need to. It is to every community. But as Jews, look, we know one of the commandments is to protect our children, to give them a better world. Our children are scared. They are marching in the streets. We all want to tell them it will be okay. But right now we can't. We can't honestly tell them that their future is not going to be way more difficult and way more painful right now because of the trajectory that we're on. So we have a responsibility to have the strength to face it. And that means collectively advocating for our government to do more. I mean, right now in Canada, we have the worst record on climate change, meaning our pollution, how much we pollute right now as a nation, predominantly because of oil and gas production. So this isn't even fossil fuels that we're using. It's not people in Canada using it. We're producing it and we're exporting it. Just from that production, that's the largest source of our pollution, of our greenhouse gas emissions today in this country. And we have the worst record of any G7 country right now. And for 2 decades, we've had governments that are promising us climate change policies. Even the Trudeau government has promised greater targets right now. And yet our pollution has not gone down. Our emissions have not gone down. Whereas a lot of other countries have already put in place really good policies on stronger policies on renewable energy. The UK has an amazing policy on a carbon budget. So we have targets in Canada, but we have no budget. It's like saying, yeah, I aspire to only spend this much, but I have no budget to track it. Well, we have no budget to track it in this country. And so we're doing really poorly. And so, it's not rocket science. We need to demand of our governments. And when we vote, we need to demand of all parties and make a decision based on which party is going to do the best on climate change. We have to start prioritizing that. And a lot of people I talk to, talk about how we also have to prioritize having a stable economy. What many people don't realize is that it's entirely linked. World economy is moving off fossil fuels. That much is clear. All the major banks now have policies not to invest and support in the expansion of oil, gas, or coal. Many countries around the world have even stronger policies on electric cars, renewables, etc. All the trends show that a stronger economy is going to be one that has put in place measures to use more renewable energy than fossil fuels and to adapt to a changing climate. And so Canada right now is really behind on that. And so these issues are linked, and so we really have got to be advocating to our governments to do more. That's the bottom line.
So if our listeners want to take action, do you have any resources that you would recommend, whether it's an organization or a website or anything that might provide a guideline to what to include in such a letter if they wanted to write to their MP or write to a higher authority?
Yeah, absolutely. There isn't an environmental group in this country who's not doing something on climate change. And we have a lot of great organizations in this country, actually. So I work with stand.earth, easy to find online, stand.earth. We run a number of campaigns. Every single climate campaign we run, we first of all do the scientific research and provide it to all of our members. You can join up and be a member for free. And then every time we run a campaign, we also do a draft letter or a petition. So you can literally just go online, click here, edit it how you want. And when you click, it gets sent to your MP or your MLA by giving, because you give your postal code. That's the same for other environmental groups. I think in Toronto, we've got a great one in environmental defense. There's a number of amazing environmental groups across the country. And I think people need to really look take a look at them, take the time to decide which one speaks to you. But for me, those are two that come to mind. I follow Environmental Defense's work. I work every day with Stand.Earth, and they'll provide people the information that they need.
Can you shout out any of the Jewish climate activists that you mentioned at the top that you are aware of that are doing the great work out there in Canada?
There's so many, but I think, well, probably one of my great heroes in the U.S. is Susan Casey Lefkowitz. She runs all the global programs for the Natural Resources Defense Council. I think she's absolutely amazing. I think in Canada, of course, very excited to have, well, we'll see how the politics go, but a Green Party leader that is a strong Jewish woman, Anna May Paul. And I think really I'm hesitating in part because I've made a commitment to myself because of the need for reconciliation in Canada and decolonization, that the majority of times when I'm lifting up other people, I'm really, really trying to lift up Indigenous voices in Canada. So yes, there are a lot of great Jewish activists in this country, but I would also say it's really important for, I think, for all of us to be looking at and lifting up the work of Indigenous activists in this country. There's an amazing climate group that just started a couple of years ago called Indigenous Climate Action, ICA. They just wrote a great paper analyzing Canada's climate policy, and some of the women who work there, Ariel Derringer and Melina Lubcon-Massimo, are some of my great heroes in this country working on climate change.
So I acknowledge that, and I think it's important, but I want to point out, and I'll double down on this, that there are many Jews that won't lift a finger until they see that it is a Jewish cause. And that is a target that we have to be focusing on in a big way, to remind people that this is, not just a cause that affects Jews. This is a cause that has deep roots in Jewish sources, in historical and contemporary Jewish ideas, and that we need to really recognize that this is not just an issue for Jews, but this is a Jewish, idea, and this is something that is urgent for the Jewish community as Jews to be looking at. And if we don't point that out, there's a lot of people that are just going to say, great, that's, it's important that we have that, I recycle, I do my thing, but I'm not really gonna fight for it. And we need to be having those voices uplifted, and we need these campaigns to not just come from these climate activist organizations, but they need to be coming from Jewish organizations as well.
Yeah, no, it is a really good point.
Tzipora, thank you so much for your time, and keep fighting the good fight.
Thanks for having me.
Let us move on to our Nachas of the week, where we talk about something Jewish and Canadian-ish sometimes that made us feel good about the week. Ilana, what's your Nachas of the week?
So I started watching this TV show in the last 2 weeks, which I binged my way through, called Barry on Crave. And I love the show. It's very dark, as a warning for those of you who might look this up after. It's about a hitman who becomes an actor. And we have Jewish actor Henry Winkler playing the acting teacher. But what really blew my mind, because I have a habit of, I finish a show and then I just stalk every person on IMDb and look at what they've done, what they've been in that I've seen, all that kind of stuff. And I saw that the lead female actor on the show is a Canadian Jew, and she's from Vancouver. Her name is Sarah Goldberg. I didn't know that, and it kind of made it, cool for me to see. I'm like, hey, we're repping on this show.
Yeah, I will check it out. Melissa, what's your Nachas of the week?
Repping hard. Well, I've got something Jewish, something Canadian, and something very, very old. So this one's a shout out to the oldest person in Canada. After a year of hearing about the mass amount of casualty in this country, where I want to give a shout out to Cecile Klein. She's from your hometown, Avi. She's 114.
She lives at Maimonides, and I was literally just at Maimonides yesterday, and I was like, maybe I'll run into her.
Did you see her?
I did not. I went to see my friend who lives there, and it's a hard protocol. You can't even go down the wrong hallways. You have to go to the person that you're visiting and all of that. So I didn't get to see her, but it's so awesome.
Yeah, we got to do something to celebrate.
The CJN Daily did a whole segment on her. And she is pretty lucid still. She wasn't talking much, but you should definitely check out the CJN Daily's segment on her. Cecile Klein.
So let's wish her, let's wish her the old 120 for real this time though.
What's your nachas, Avi?
I was at Indigo. Because I believe in bookstores, big and small, and physical ones, and I buy books from everywhere. I buy books online, I buy books in person, I buy books at used bookstores, I buy books in new bookstores. I love all bookstores. I'm the son of a librarian, and I have a massive amount of books all the time, and I'm flipping through randomly, and I find this book. Rick Salutin. Do you guys know Rick Salutin?
No.
Canadian writer, and he wrote this. He did this. It's huge. It's like this big book that's a graphic novel illustration, and it's called Gideon's Bible, and it's his telling of like the early stories of the Bible, because his son is named Gideon and he's talking to his son. It's a play on the Gideon Bibles that are in the,
every hotel room.
In the hotel rooms. But his son's name is Gideon. His kid asks like, what's my name about? And so he has to start talking to him about the Bible. And it's like this really beautiful, moving, it's more about the Bible than it is like about. It's not a commentary on the Bible, but it's really beautifully illustrated. And it's a really poignant, nice little tale about him and his son. And he's Canadian. And it's a very nice book. And it's called Gideon's Bible. And You should go check it out.
We're on it.
Our rabbinic voice this week is Rabbi Shachar Orenstein, co-executive director of Aleph Canada and the co-founder of Teva Quebec.
Hi, everyone. I want to share with you a teaching that I got from one of the leaders in the Jewish environmental movement today. His name is Rabbi Yonatan Nerel, and this teaching is featured on the Kanfei Nisharim website, which is a tremendous resource. I invite you to check it out. So there, Rabbi Yonatan Nerel recounts the story in this week's parasha that tells of two tribes, the tribe of Reuven and Gad, who have this talk with Moses. They say to Moses that we prioritize the economy more than we prioritize the education of our children. And Moses says, you got your priorities wrong. You got to get your priorities straight. And this raises the question, what are our priorities in our lives? Do we have our priorities right? Are our priorities the priorities that we need today? And so what I'd like to challenge us to do is to think of where we are prioritizing the environment in our list of priorities. Is there a small change that we can do in our life to bump up the environment, the ecology, the planet in our daily life? I mean, it could be a small change and it could have a big impact. I want to share with you something that I did and that we did together with Teva Quebec. As you may know, there's lots of forest fires going on. There's a heat dome happening in the West Coast. What did we do a few years back as a response? We went up north. There was a tribe, the Atikamekw tribe, only 2,000 people left, but they had a forest fire that went to the edge of their community. We gathered a bunch of university students and we showed our solidarity, we planted trees, and this was our humble effort to do something. We don't have to do something as exciting, as powerful as that, but I'm sure that there's something that you could do in your life. We challenge you to do something to bump up the environment, the ecology in our list of priorities so that we can rebalance our priorities. The earth is out of balance. I think that's pretty clear. How can we help restore the balance in the earth and fulfill our mission, which is given to us in Bereshit, le'ovda u'leshamra, to serve and protect the planet.
Thank you for listening to Bonjour Chai for Thursday, July 8th. Our producer is Michael Fraiman, technical production by Andre Goulet. Our music is by Socalled. Special thanks to Michael Citrom for not letting me, I just took it and I shamelessly ripped off the title of today's podcast from his Facebook wall. We are a project of the Jewish Living Lab and are distributed by the CJN Podcast Network. Subscribe on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Please leave a comment and a rating on the platform of your choice and let us know what you think about our discussions on the CJN Lounge on Facebook. I'm Avi Finegold.
I'm Melissa Lantsman.
And I'm Ilana Zackon.